Welcome, everybody, to today's Masters of Marketing. Yes, I'm going to start over. Welcome, everyone, to today's Masters of Marketing. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Christoph Trappe. He's the Chief Content and Marketing Officer at the Authentic Storytelling Project, and he's going to teach us how to make content performance easier. This session is going to go over the steps in his book, Content Performance Culture, and it's been newly released on Amazon. As part of this, we're going to talk about how you create content once and how you turn it into video, podcasts, articles, design, so that you can spread it across all of the different channels. So Christoph, thanks. Great to have you. Can't wait to see your presentation.
You bet. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. Certainly, you guys are doing a lot of great things out there with having the daily live stream. Talk about a sprint every day, right?
Talk about dedication right there. Absolutely.
Dedication right there. Fantastic. So my book, Content Performance Culture, just came out so you can't show it to you because of the background. Okay, learn something new every day. It's also behind me. Came out in January, went to #1 for the public relations category on Amazon. And the reason I wrote the book, we'll dive into a lot of the things in the book. Obviously, you can't cover everything in it, but some of the highlights. When I grew up, as a content marketer and a journalist, content performance culture was not a thing. You know, people said to me, Christoph, how many people read your article? 83,000, 100,000, whatever, right? Whatever the circulation was, whatever the number of subscriptions was. And on marketing, very similar. How many people looked at your billboard? However many people drove by there. Every single person looked at the billboard, of course. But of course, we know just because you have 1 million impressions doesn't mean you leave 1 million impressions, right? In those times. But today, everything, we want to measure everything. How many people are watching, how many people are converting, how many people are doing anything, how many people are subscribing. That was the first question to these guys. How many people are on the webinars? How many people do you send it to? I mean, it never ends, right? Everybody wants the numbers. And there are actually some steps that you can go through to make sure that you actually create that content performance culture. And the word culture is important to be in there. And here's the reason why, because if you are not set up to actually have a chance to create content that also performs and the culture doesn't work for that, it's not going to work. And at some point, you're going to have some executive screaming at you and saying, screaming, of course, telling you that, oh, marketing doesn't work. It's not that marketing doesn't work. It's you're not following all the steps to do it correctly. So here's the pillars that I talk about when it comes to a content performance culture. First of all, you have to get the culture embraced. And you can have some pushback. Some pushback is actually expected. And I estimate that the number you want to be below is probably about 35%. So if you have 30 or 35% of people, they're pushing back nonstop, that is probably, you can overcome that. If you have 80% pushback, impossible, right? You need new players, new leadership. Maybe it's not the right time. Maybe it's not the right company, but you do need to have to embrace that culture. And that also includes leadership.
Christoph.
Leadership explicitly has to say, here's,
Hey, quick question. Hey, when you say pushback, do you mean external pushback or internal pushback from kind of politics and navigating
internal?
Internal. Got it.
Yep.
So when you're
internal.
saying,
yes, guys.
And you're quantifying that, you're saying 35% to 80%. So if 1/3 of your campaigns are getting denied, that's kind of like a good metric to go by.
Well, maybe not denied, but if 1/3 of the time there is pushback on new initiatives and new things and those kind of things, you might be able to overcome that. But if 80% of everything always gets denied, good luck. You're not making any groundway. And
right.
Thanks for jumping in. If you guys have questions, jump in. I will just keep talking. If you don't stop me, we will be here Monday morning. Promise. No, I'm kidding. I have plans this weekend too, even though the plans are all the same nowadays, right? Everybody's at home. But yeah, you need the internal embracing of the culture. I mean, you got to have it. If you don't have it, you're not going to go there. And you need the buy-in from the leadership team. And so every once in a while you hear people talk about the chief content officer should be, it's not an executive role. Baloney. You need somebody who actually leads the content side of things, top level in the organization. Here's why: they need a seat at the table. They need to bring up what's working, what's not working, and go from there. Otherwise, it's really, really hard to make it a priority. The next thing is innovation by all. And here's why that's important. There is so much stuff happening nonstop that it can't just be the boss who has all the answers. And that's how I grew up. When I grew up, my boss always had the answers, right? Should we publish this? Should we do this? Should we do that? The boss had the answers. But today, there's like 15 ways to do anything, right? I mean, think about it. We'll talk about podcasts. Think about how you record a podcast. I just did a podcast earlier with Nick Westergaard, his On Brand podcast. It's going to publish on Monday. And he recorded with Skype. I record with Anchor. We're recording here with Zoom. We're turning the audio into a podcast. I use Anchor. Now I use Switcher Studio. Other people use something totally different. Some people do live streams. There's 100 ways to do everything, right? Or 15 ways. So think about speaking up, finding better ways to do things, and finding better workflows. My favorite example when it comes to this is email marketing. When I first started growing up in content marketing, it was very common. So you put your email text in on a piece of paper, which I probably can't hold up because the background is white, but on a piece of paper, in a Word document, you send it over for approval, 89 steps to get it approved, and then you copy and paste into the email system and manually send it. And so that is a workflow that can be so much easier, can be automated so much better nowadays with different tools, with different services. There's no reason to do some of those things. And how do you push that forward? You have to have somebody, first of all, bring up, hey, Christoph or whoever, we're doing this outdated workflow when it comes to email marketing. Oh yeah, what's the workflow? Oh, we're doing Word documents. So you have to bring it up. You have to bring your voice to the table. The next play mentality is the next pillar when it comes to embracing a content performance culture. And yes, totally, I was an athlete for most of my youth. I went to the University of Iowa, Division I scholarship athlete on a Big Ten football team. And what do athletes do? What do football players do, or really any athlete, right? They run a play. And then sometimes that play is good, and sometimes it's bad. And honestly, it doesn't make any difference what just happened. You have to run another play, the end. Even when you score a touchdown, you have to kick the PAT. When you kick the PAT, you got to kick off, right? It never ends. It's like next play mentality. So I would really recommend that anybody embraces the next play mentality. Something didn't work. Instead of dwelling on it, so I'll give you one example. Writers dwell on typos so much, it's crazy. And you made a typo and it's like, oh my God, just fix the damn typo. Beep, right? But just fix the typo, like move on. You had a typo, it happens. And Qatar, I think that's how you pronounce it, Airways, they had a typo. They had their company name misspelled on the plane. Believe it or not. So the company name was misspelled on the plane. And you know what the company did? All they did, they took a picture, they tweeted it, and they said, oops, this one has to go back to the shop for repainting. So if they can live down a typo on an airplane, you can live down a typo in a blog post. Fix the typo, move on. But the next play mentality is super, super important. The next thing is you have to have the right players in the right seats. And certainly that's a terminology from sports as well. The right players in the right seats. But there are different things we need on a content team. And so the first one is you need somebody to come up with a strategy. What are we trying to do? Who are we trying to reach? Why? How are we going to measure it? How do we move forward with that? And then you need the content production. Content production is getting easier while it's also getting harder. So I'll give you an example. So we're doing this live stream here. We can also turn the live stream into a podcast, super easy to do. We can also take the content from the live stream and turn it into an article or many articles. And then as I did, I turned it into a book, some of this content. So it's already in a book too. And you can it's easier to do than it used to be because you're doing the create once, publish everywhere model. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. But on the other hand, it's also harder to do because what channel are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on this channel? Are you going to focus on this channel? And where do you get the best bang for your buck? But the right players usually includes some kind of people who know how to write. At the end of the day, so even if you do a webinar, you still have to write an introduction to get people to come to the webinar. Do you have a title that actually draws people in? That's writing, right? It's not writing a book, but it's a form of writing. If you do ads, I just started a remarketing campaign again the other day, and doing Google ads might be the hardest writing, seriously, because you have like no space. Like they give you 30 characters for the first headline. And I'm like, yeah, I don't even know what to say in 30 characters. So you have to cut something down and they give you a little bit more, then leave you 90 for the description or whatever it is. So it's still, you need somebody who can produce the content, who is a good writer. Maybe they can talk on podcasts, maybe they can do other things, but you need somebody doing the production for sure.
Yeah, we can talk to that for real quick about Google Ads. It's like getting your whole entire advertising campaign into a single tweet, right? So the AdWords is so intense with its kind of restrictions. And AdWords still, we were testing AdWords for a client a couple months ago, and it worked really well. It worked so well, in fact, that like we were seeing like crazy conversion rates, but the churn on our best performing ads that Google kept on serving, it's kept on getting the clicks from, like on the back end, the churn was crazy. So it was almost like what we found some stuff within Google Ads and copywriting for Google Ads is that you almost shouldn't optimize per click, right? You should optimize for the highest level intent of the copy as well. Because what happens if you put in something that a lot of people are going to click on, Google's going to feed that more and think that that's part of your conversion. And even if they convert and then they churn, there's not really a long-term LTV kind of associated with AdWords that I've seen. Like in terms of like, you can't really track LTV and optimize for that. So some of the content that you write on AdWords needs to be like super, super sharp in terms of like understanding the long-term model as well.
And so what you were describing there is exactly why having a content performance culture is so difficult to do across all the channels. Because I mean, it gets, you have to measure things, you have to see what's working. You have to, at the very least, you have to know all the acronyms you're throwing around. I mean, think about that. You're in a marketing team meeting. I bet you how many people will go, what's he even talking about, right? So again, if you have a good culture, right, and you embrace it, you should ask. And that's another thing. If you don't know something, like I one time I worked with sales team, and they said, I Googled what you were talking about, and I can't find what that acronym even stands for. So it was the COPE acronym, create once, publish everywhere. And, I'm like, just ask, be a team, move forward from there. So the right players also involves having the right analysts. Somebody still has to analyze what is working and what's not working. So just something to keep in mind that you definitely need that on the team as well. And then the final pillar is the ongoing evaluation. So if you don't have the ongoing look at what's working and what's not working, it's never going to work. It's just going to be harder and harder and harder, and then evolve and figure out why something isn't working and how do you move forward from there. I still remember a mentor who was the CEO at a publishing house in Germany. They made the transition, Ebner Publishing, to a content performance culture. And he says, they never have time. The writers have no time to do anything more. And I said, I know. What do we do? And he says, here's what you have to do. If you write this much content, right? Most of the content, like this much content will be home run, and then this much will be average, and then this much will be, a little bit, will be terrible. Stop writing the stuff that nobody consumes. The end. Just stop writing it. It takes you a while to figure out, but that's where the next play mentality comes in. So that's basically the 5 pillars of setting up a content performance culture. For anybody listening, it's much easier said in theory than to actually implement it. It's a long process. And the other thing is, I call them content theorists, not terrorists, theorists. And they basically, here's the theory how you can do it, but they've never done it. I'm a big fan. I actually follow the Washington Redskins. They just got a new coach, Ron Rivera, and he said, don't draw me a map if you haven't been there. So I've actually implemented this, so it does work, but it is a lot of work, especially in organizations where you have higher than that 30% internal pushback. Just something to keep in mind. Let's talk about the create once, publish everywhere model for a little while. At some point, it'll be more and more automated. We're still in a very relatively manual workflow when it comes to that, when you think of all the different channels. But what is the create once, publish everywhere model? Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the most out of our content across all the channels where it's relevant. And here are the channels that are currently, in my opinion, relevant for most businesses. Excuse me. You still need a website. The end. I mean, seriously, if you don't have a website where you can send people, where you can rank for things, you're just missing out. Plus, people search for you. I mean, I have a few examples to give really quickly. We had hail damage in our neighborhood. There was a big hailstorm, and I was searching for companies that could fix my roof. And guess what? The people that had a website, I could look at their testimonials. I could look at all their different things. I could look at their team. I could see their prices sometimes even. And it was just, it's an added level of respectability, really, if you think about it. And then some companies didn't have a website. I was like, who are they? Like, I don't even know anything about them. So make sure you have a website where you can send people. You don't have to overthink the URL. Just have something simple. Make sure people can actually remember it. But you do need a website for SEO as well. Now, I have been told recently, I did a show with Greg Gifford on local SEO. There are ways to still rank locally, even if you don't have a website, if you at least use Google My Business. But at the end of the day, it's better to have a website. So start with the website as your centerpiece, and then go from there. Sharing content on that website is extremely helpful. Do you have to blog every day? No, I don't even blog every day. Do you have to blog every week? Maybe not. Do you have to blog every month? Probably. But share something that you can that helps your target audience. And also, what happens, the more you actually share content that's valuable, you start ranking higher, right? Google pays attention to you. Google indexes you quicker, and people are starting to look at your content. So I would highly recommend a blog post every month, at least for most businesses, is probably a good idea. More, if you can handle it, the better. Not the better, but that's a good strategy as well. Podcasting as part of that strategy, I think, is a fantastic way to do it. And here's the reason why. So first of all, this is a live show, right? So these guys can't edit anything, but you can still edit on a podcast, right? But here's what you can't edit on a podcast. If I sound like a jerk, they can't edit it out. There's no remove jerk filter edit function anywhere. So people come across the way they are, and you can actually see whether you like people, whether not that you're going to pick on that on its own, but you can see, do they understand the topic? Can they talk about it? Can they carry on a conversation like this, right? Do they know what they're talking about? Do they appear knowledgeable? Yes, that's a thing. And are they authentic? And I'll give you an example. So I picked up my book, right, which you can't see because there is the background the same color. It's actually kind of human to make a mistake. Just live with it, right? Oh my God, just learned something new. Awesome. How great. So figure out those different channels. But that's why I like podcasting, because it brings across the humanness in people, and it brings across your personality. So try that, whether you do it by yourself, if you're just the owner of a company, or if you're if you have a marketing team, or if you bring on guests. I'm a big fan of bringing on guests and just talking about different topics that have happened or some things the team has seen, and then go from there. The next step, I like to start with podcasts a lot of times, and then I turn them into blog posts. So I just did the podcast on local SEO with Greg, and now I already published it, and he's promoting it, I'm promoting it, and now I'm writing an art. So I'm letting that sit out there. I'm letting that starting to rank. And podcasts are starting to rank. So this is very interesting. 10 years ago. So first of all, headlines always rank, but now they're being indexed, just the audio, right? So if you're talking, there is a chance that your audio is being indexed by Apple, and I don't know if Spotify is doing it maybe, but Google and others. So there is a chance that that alone can help you be found when people search for that topic. So just something to think about. That was not a thing that existed 10 years ago or 5 years ago. That's relatively new, that those things start ranking. And then I turn them into a blog post. So I'm still planning on writing an article on, actually tomorrow probably, on local SEO, how to get local links that matter. I don't have anything on that topic on my website. It's not like, it's kind of tangible to most of the things I do, but at the end of the day, why wouldn't I share it if I already have the content? And it still fits within the marketing industry as a whole. So the other thing, when you do podcasts, consider doing live versions of those podcasts as well. So my podcast, for example, the Business Storytelling Podcast, has been growing, but it's still relatively, lowish listenership. But when I go live, I have a much higher listenership on the live streams. So I try to do that. So think about, what are all the channels? How do you integrate them? And then how do you move forward from there? From my blog, once I've done that, the article, I use WordPress, I use the Jetpack plugin. There's other tools, other services that offer similar things. So for like email marketing, there's now artificial intelligence. Email marketing providers, they pull from a pool of content and then they send it to your email list. The way I currently do it on my blog, you can subscribe to my blog. And every time I publish a new article, if you signed up for instant delivery, you get the article. If you signed up for weekly, you get them weekly. If there's 7, you get 7. If there's 1, you get 1. And it automatically pushes out. It also automatically pushes out to all the different social channels. So that's automated. And what's interesting about that, so figure out what kind of budget do you have, what platforms do you want to use, how do you want to start. I still think some of the WordPress tools are fantastic. I've seen big companies use WordPress. Doesn't mean you have to use WordPress. I'm just saying, look at the return on effort for sure. So live audio, we talked about, yeah.
So when you say that it pushes out to all your social platforms, if you use something like Sprout Social or something that takes your content and distributes it, are you going in manually and kind of tweaking it for those platforms? Or how do you handle the auto-generated content being what you want it to be?
So the way that works, that's a great question. So now there's actually tools out there that will write social posts for you. So you don't even have to write them yourself anymore. They're kind of, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. There's different tools out there. Edgar, I think, is one. Lately is another. You give the URL and it just posts it. I don't usually do that. What I do is I go in and when you write the post, there's a field that lets you optimize, update the social posting. And I usually just do that. So then when it publishes, that's the first post that goes out. Then what I do, I use Buffer currently. So I go in and I'll just pick some more headlines and some more sound bites, and I will add a few more posts from there. Quite honestly, the days of social click-throughs are kind of gone. I mean, there's very rarely where I go, oh my goodness, most of this post traffic came from social. That hardly ever happens anymore, right? Most of it comes from the email. Most of it comes from from search after a little while. Usually that takes a little bit, but the email is probably the biggest one. Social is kind of in there, but it's I would not, you don't need to spend 80% of your time on social, quite frankly, as tempting as it is. The other thing is growing your email list, super, super important. Make sure it's easy to sign up, make sure people can sign up. So part of it is to create good content, but the other part is to actually get it in front of people and distribute it well and distribute it on a good schedule. And so I test all the time. Every once in a while I have a pop-up with the sign-up form. If I didn't see a big jump, I take it down. Now somebody's starting to mow, right? Can you hear that? Yep. Everybody's working at home nowadays. I'll close the window. So, okay, that's as good as we can do. Make sure people can sign up. And then the other thing that I found working really well is to put the sign up form in different spots where people are looking. One is I love to put it on top of my articles. And my funny story here is, so the first time I did that, I immediately grew my list by 5% day over day for like 2 weeks, something like that. And then I had to move it because people got too used to it. And I was a finalist in one of these awards, social media blogs or something. And one of the judges said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe they put the sign up form on top of the articles, because that's not common." And it's not, right? Most people put them at the bottom in the sidebar. But I had 5% growth year over year. Why would I not year over year, day over day? Why would I not put it there, right? So think about, how do you get people tied to you? How do you make sure people can subscribe? And then how do you find new channels? The one thing when it comes to new channels, Alexa type devices are another thing that's taken off more and more. I don't even have one. I use my iPhone for the most part, but people are doing it. There's entire Facebook groups out there. That's all they talk about. How do I set up a routine for my kids, during this quarantine? How do I do this? How do I do that? What do I do if somebody's at the front door and it triggered or whatever? So find those little areas that you can also participate in. So for example, my podcast is available as an Alexa skill. Super easy to set up. There is blueprints where you can just do that yourself. Templates, basically. You can do that with other content, articles. Articles can be read out loud. So find those new things, and they do help you actually stand out in front of your audience and the people you work with. To wrap it up, I'll mention one more thing, and if there's any questions, you guys can jump in. I know you've already had some good questions along the way. Is virtual reality video. And virtual reality video is so easy to do today. And just to show this to you, so if I have my phone, right, you can now put the 360 camera directly on the top of your phone, and you can put it in the middle of the room, and you can shoot 360 video. You still have to know how to edit it. You still want to think about voiceover, what's the story you're trying to tell. But at the end of the day, 360, or virtual reality video, where you can actually wear the goggles, has never been easier and never been cheaper. Cameras are like $80 now. And so here's the reason I bring that up. When I was in B2B publishing, I would go to trade shows. And so a lot of times the trade show booths, they're also advertisers, right? But they also have stories to share. So I would go through their booth with my 360 camera. Guess who they remember afterwards of all their media partners? They remember us, right? Because they were like, oh, that's the brand that did 360 video, VR video, and it was super awesome. So just think about that. It's good for your audience, but it's also good for your perception in the market, and it's getting easier and easier. Of course, once you have a VR video, make sure you turn that into other content, not just on YouTube. But the other example that I actually did is a VR video, and then I took the audio, the interview of the people, that was the voiceover, and I turned that into a podcast. And then the podcast turned into an article, and then went from there and used it on like every channel that we could think of. So at the end of the day, to get your content to perform, yes, you want to be deliberate, and yes, you don't need to do it every single day to publish. But when people tell you, slow down, do less, they're not even doing that, right? Don't slow down, do less, be more deliberate, sure, but you have to be on a good cadence. And it can just be a couple times a year, quite frankly, for most brands. So that's in a nutshell how I have seen content performance cultures work. Easier said than done, but it certainly is possible, and it can help your brand stand out.
Awesome. Christoph, this is great advice. I always like to ask this question since you have like a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge in the industry, and you've been doing this for a while. What was the campaign that you can flip this question in one of two ways? What was the campaign that had the most unexpected benefits that you didn't think that would work, or the opposite, the campaign that you had your heart set on? You're like, oh, this is going to work. This is going to be amazing, and it just and it fell short. And kind of like, why do you think why?
Well, first of all, there's always campaigns that take off and you have no idea why they took off. And then there's always campaigns that don't do anything and you thought they were the best thing since sliced bread. So that is like, I hedge my hopes, honestly, on most things and just kind of keep pushing forward. One campaign that comes to mind, though, when I was doing a project with the United Way, so United Way has print publications that come out all the time, and we wanted to do more digital storytelling. So we decided to do augmented reality, right? And so when you held your phone on top of the print piece, you could watch a video, you could do other things, go to a website, et cetera, et cetera. This is like a decade ago, roughly now. And what was interesting is, so we used an app called Layer. I think it was free for whatever the level that we needed. But anyway, so hardly anybody used it. Had I don't know, 30 views or something. So from that perspective, I thought, oh, people are going to use it, but nobody used it. It may have been higher, but it wasn't very high. But what the unexpected thing was, since it's so new, we got a lot of media coverage. People were talking about us. Everybody's like, oh, look at this. United Way rolled out augmented reality. Just that alone was worth doing, right?
That's so interesting. So what you're saying is, even if you invest in kind of forward-thinking or forward-looking technology, and maybe the campaign itself wasn't a success, the PR around the campaign ended up being more success than the actual campaign itself, which was kind of like the unexpected. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and that's something I noticed overall when you talk about emerging technology, because everybody is trying to keep up. And here's the secret, guys. There's no way to keep up. Impossible. Just give up. You can't keep up. Just try to go with the flow, learn what you can, and then implement it. When the right time comes. But it changes all the time. And the favorite example is personalization, right? Everybody's trying to do personalization. And now Forrester says, oh, personalization will go away because the return isn't there. And now all the experts are saying, or a bunch of experts are saying, oh, it's not going away, we disagree. So what is it? I mean, good luck trying to keep up on everything. Just try to do your best. Don't feel overwhelmed. But certainly emerging technology, everybody's trying to pay attention to what they want to do next or should be doing next.
For sure. It sounds like it's the channel thing where you can't focus on video and live streams all at once. You pick one emerging technology, focus on that, and ignore the rest. I had a question that goes back to almost the beginning of your presentation. You said that everyone needs to be an innovator and a contributor, and you need to make a culture for that. There's a famous example of like an aluminum mill that got no feedback. And then as soon as they implemented something saying, we're going to make it so everyone can help make us safer, then it wasn't about producing more, it was about being safe. And when everyone thought about being safe, they had no trouble giving their feedback, which actually helped the aluminum mill produce a lot more. So my question with that analogy is, how do you prompt people to be innovators? And are there certain things you can add to your culture that have a side effect of boosting innovation?
You first of all have to create that environment that people believe you, that you mean it, right? So a lot of people they're out there and they say, oh, we want your feedback, but they really don't want it. And it also depends on, what the feedback is. If somebody's feedback just is, oh, we don't like you, well, too bad, right? I'm still here, but how do we move forward as a team? And make sure you have the conversation. You can just ask people, hey, what do you think of that? How do we make it better? And then sometimes you need to give people just the license to try new things. And here's the other thing. Don't always wait for permission. right? I mean, I still think of some designers, and I would go to a designer and say, hey, I need this something for an article, and they come back with something much better. I mean, a designer one time created a GIF, which is not anything innovative if you think about it. We see them all day long, but they're pretty innovative within a brand blog post. You never see them in a brand blog post, and she just pulled that off, right? But nobody asked for that. She kind of did that on her own after she heard what was what they were looking for. So think about, how do you open up that conversation, encourage people, and then people honestly just need to kind of step up and share their ideas. And here's the other thing: when you share ideas, you probably will have to repeat yourself. It's like parenting. And every time, there's a change happening in an organization, you have to say everything 15 times, 8 times, 20 times, right? Same thing here. Just because you said it once, maybe your leader or whoever you were talking to, maybe they didn't even hear it, or maybe they had to move on to something else. So bring it up again, or maybe you didn't use the right words, right? So don't feel like shut down. For us, I was in a company one time, and they said, "Oh, we already brought that up," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And how long
Did you
ago?
act on it?
8 years ago, 8 years ago or so, and like nobody even remembered that it was brought up, right? Plus, so bring it up again. Don't wait 8 years to bring something up again.
For sure. Sounds like you need to add your 30% time from Google so that you can experiment. And it kind of sounds like you need to implement a culture that's the difference between a marketing team and a growth team, where a marketing team has to be right 75% of the time, and a growth team fails 9 out of 10 times. They just have to have the culture of experiment, experiment, experiment. We have about 5 minutes left. One of the questions that I always like to ask is, where do you go to get inspired to learn more about this, be it videos, blog posts, articles? How do you stay up to date and ahead of the wave?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. I do follow the right people on Twitter. LinkedIn kind of works too. I also have Google Alerts set up for certain topics. So I see things pop up, and I think they're like content marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So you can do that. I would recommend they have a new feature, Daily Digest, so you don't get 10 emails anymore. You get one email. It all comes in one longer email. That didn't used to be the case, but super helpful. So I do that. But here's the real way to stay up on things and know what's happening. Yes, you want to read people, but here's the thing. Like, think about this conversation today. We talked for 45 minutes. Like, yes, you can do things. Yes, there are actionable steps. Well, we can't tell you everything in 45 minutes, right? You have to jump in and you have to try things, and you have to learn as you are trying those things. It's by far the best way to learn things. And that's why I would also encourage any leader in any content performance culture, go get into the weeds every once in a while. Try it. Like, we were talking about the Google ads earlier. I just set that up myself the other day, right? That's the only reason I knew exactly that it's 30 characters. Like, I can't read an article and remember that. I remember it because I did it. So make sure you try things, you make sure you see what's working, and learn as you go.
For sure. It's the difference between theory and practice,
Exactly.
Yeah. If you read the book, you'll get the knowledge. If you do the project, you'll remember the knowledge. As we close, along with the question that I previously asked, you said you follow the right people. Is there a specific person that if you could interview them, you'd want to interview them for 45 minutes?
Well, so first of all, when that's the case, they've already been on my podcast, I'm sure. But what I have done is, I've had Joe Pulizzi on there, the godfather of content marketing, Andy Christodina, Michael Brenner. They're all experts in the field. And really the people Scott Westwater, he's coming on with his wife. They're talking about voice search. So here's the other reason. So first of all, when I interview those people, yes, it's great because, you have more content that you can talk about. But I always learn something on some of these topics, and like voice search. I said, well, here's what I thought the thing is. And they said, oh, it is. And then this and this and this. Or local search with Greg, there's always things to learn from. So I love that.
I love that too. you're running your podcast, we're running live stream. I wish I could go to college forever and just continuously learn. And that's what interviewing people is, being the conduit to share it with your audience. And you in return get to ask the questions that the audience thinks is interesting and you think are interesting. So it's win-win for everyone. Christoph,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your presentation. Where's a good way that people can reach out to you to learn more from you? Obviously they can get your book, but maybe reach out on LinkedIn, other places like that.
Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. You can connect there, or if you don't want to connect, you can just click the follow button. Either way works. AuthenticStorytelling.net is the blog. Links to everything is on there, the podcast, the book, weekly blog post at least. And please stay in touch.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christoph. And thank you to everyone who came to this episode of Masters of Marketing. See you tomorrow.